Black the Name by D.B. Halpert. Narrated by the author, D.B. Halpert. Chapter 26. The Cove. Another 2 days pass, and before the night can set in on the third evening after Pearl and Elizabeth's most recent potion consumption, Crow, the man in the crow's nest, calls down to the deck. "Port ahead!" Elizabeth rushes to the deck, seeing from her eye on the mast and wanting to see it with her primary eyes, a distant gathering of ships. She joins Pearl, Aldrin, and Auburn at the side of the ship, looking out to the distance where they see a run-down port sitting in the middle of the ocean, with seemingly no land near it. Turning to Esmeralda, Aldrin asks, "What's this? Where have you brought us?" Letting one of the crew take the wheel, Esmeralda steps to the group, arms raised, explaining, "That is the pirate city known as the Cove." Pearl looks excited with Esmeralda's words, but Aldrin seems upset, turning to the captain, asking in a raised voice, "What were you thinking bringing us to the pirate cove?" "Take it easy. We just need to resupply and alleviate ourselves of the stolen goods we are transporting." "Stolen?" Elizabeth asks, turning to Esmeralda. "Well, our ship was contracted to arrive at a dwarven port, and we are never going to arrive there. So yes, stolen. Don't worry, you can keep the dress," Esmeralda replies with a wink. The ship sails ever closer to the sea-borne port, revealing as it grows on the horizon 3 distinct sections, each with very distinct architecture to their floating structures. All 3 sections consist of buildings that, in a normal city, would appear run down, but for a floating in the middle of the ocean city, appear as sturdy as they could be. The ship finally makes port as the sky darkens in red evening glow to bear down the night, and with the gangplank lowered, Esmeralda and her crew are taken by a sudden panic when a large group stands on the docks waiting for them. Draping a cloak over Elizabeth's shoulders, Pearl whispers into her young friend's ear, "You should probably hide Boop and stay covered. We're not going to be interacting with good people, and they would probably not think twice before forcing themselves on you, especially with your looks." Pulling the hood of the cloak over her head, Elizabeth responds with a knowing nod, saying, "You're probably right. Boop, time to rest." She continues, gesturing him into her arms under the cloak. Slowly, Esmeralda takes the lead of the crew, stepping back down the plank to the gathered party that noisily clamors as it awaits the new arrivals. Getting down to the dock, the group and the crew wait in uneasy anticipation as Esmeralda steps to the chattering gathering, asking, "What is the meaning of this?" One from the group waiting on the dock steps forward. With a smirk on his gaunt, leathery face, under a greasy pinstripe mustache, he responds, "Jay wants to welcome you back." Pearl recoils with a surprised smile. "Esmeralda, are they talking about Jay? The Vincent Jay?" Turning only halfway to Pearl, Esmeralda responds, "No," before being interrupted by the crowd on the dock. A deep, growling voice bellows from behind the wall of people, separating the ship's passengers from the floating city.
"Don't sell me so short. I am his blood, 5th generation. But you never took pride in your birthright, did ye, daughter?"
The group splits, revealing a heavy-set man with a large black beard, dressed in elegant captain's regalia of blue, black, and red silks. A gold hand guard clicks against a jewel-laden scabbard at his side while he steps to the front of his group, drawing a device like Aldrin's rifle, but shorter and constructed to be used in one hand. And he gestures to Esmeralda, arms spread, for a welcoming hug. Uneasy, Esmeralda steps from her crew and passengers to the gesturing man, awkwardly embracing him in a contact she doesn't want to be part of. Esmeralda whispers in the man's ear, "Don't, please don't, Father. They're relying on me."
What are you worried about, my daughter? I won't be hurting your crew. No, this be your doing.
The man growls, pulling Esmeralda to the side and raising the end of the short metal tube to the group by the ship. He pulls the trigger, releasing a frighteningly familiar thunderous crack. The device releases a cloud of white smoke as Crow falls to the dock, grasping his chest. Taking a step to her felled friend, Esmeralda is pulled back into the man's grasp as she screams, "No!" Pounding the man's chest, she continues, "You said you wouldn't hurt them." Letting the small one-handed rifle fall from his hand into the hands of one of the lackeys that stepped forward from the group behind him, the man responds with a laugh,
My dear, I didn't. That be your handiwork for going against my will and marrying that nobody in Blackgate. Now that it is settled, you're forgiven, me daughter. Come, we have something to discuss still. Welcome to the Cove, guests of me daughter. I am Cromwell J., King of the Pirates. Enjoy your stay. All right, lads. Clean and sink.
Pearl and Elizabeth stand in stunned horror, looking at Crow, heaving in pain. As Esmeralda steps from with Cromwell J., the mob behind him on the deck rushes past the arriving crew and passengers onto the ship they arrived in. Richard drops to Crow's side, yelling at Cromwell as he walks away.
You monster! He did nothing to you.
A blade flies through the air, piercing Richard's abdomen, thrown from Cromwell, who is turned standing, still facing the group once more, who growls back, softly but audibly.
What? You think I was supposed to hurt me daughter for her sins against me? This is more fun, and keeps her beautiful little girl. You wouldn't want her to look ugly and maimed, would you?
Elizabeth goes to help Richard, but is stopped by Esmeralda's first mate, Rev, the large, very tan man who did most of the heavy lifting during the journey. Looking at the large man's brown eyes, Elizabeth feels a wave of defeat, with Rev shaking his head to indicate for her not to interfere. Pearl pulls Elizabeth back, and the two wait with Aldrin and Auburn for a second before Rev and Lorm take lead, showing them into the floating sea town. The smell of the sea is somehow stronger in the air around Elizabeth and the others than it had been in Errolfamar or the voyage to this place. The sound of drunken jubilance fills the air around the group of outsiders as they step into a tavern building across the planks from the floating mansion that Cromwell forces Esmeralda into. The 6 remaining individuals from the voyage only catch a glimpse of their ship sinking with the mob of pirates jumping from its deck with crates of bounty in their arms. With the ship sunk, the 6 step into the sunken shanty. Lorm organizes for a space to be available to the group to stay in while matters are dealt with between Esmeralda and her father. The room that is allotted to them to use rests in the water below the inn, behind the bar. Subdivided into sections, the curtains of the room is quiet, dark, and cool. As Elizabeth, Pearl, Aldrin, Auburn, Rev, and Lorm rest their feet, and relieve themselves of their equipment in silence. Several minutes pass before, clenching to his fist, Lorm breaks, yelling, "I can't take it! What is the captain doing with that swine?" Growling, Rev stands, explaining,
"You know as well as I do Cromwell is her father, and that something like this was bound to happen. Chances are Captain has a plan, and is putting it into motion as we sit here speaking and worrying about her." "I guess you're right. I just can't stand around not knowing."
"I might be able to help with that," Elizabeth responds, breaking into the conversation. Leaping into the section Elizabeth claimed, Lorm asks,
"What are you talking about?"
Pearl joins Lorm, peeking through the curtain, to Elizabeth asking, "Are you going to use your third eye?" "No. I have to be able to see the surface to be able to use that," Elizabeth explains, turning to Pearl's interjection, continuing, "But I can try to see my connection would grant me the ability to peer into a room I'm not in." Lorm looks panicked between Elizabeth and Pearl, asking,
"Third eye, connection. What are you talking about?"
Turning back to Lorm, Elizabeth explains, "Long story short, my birth parents used me as an offering to their cult, binding my soul to a forgotten god. Lucky for me, they are dead now, and the connection they made with my soul, it is to this being, seems to not be strong enough for it to even care about me. Not with the little amount of magic I use from it, at least. I was scared of this power at first, and tried to distance myself from it, but venturing with Pearl has shown me that I can do some good with it, even if it is from an evil source. Apart from that, I also have recently became able to grow a third eye, to be able to see from any surface that is not my face, and I can keep it there for as long as I want, as long as I don't walk too far away or let it get poked." Overwhelmed, Lorm stands there, stunned by the onslaught of information spewing from Elizabeth, and he stops her before she can finish, saying,
"Forget I asked. Just, if you can see what the captain is up to, I would appreciate it."
With an acknowledging nod, Elizabeth stands onto the small bed in her curtained off section of the room. And crossing her arms and relaxing her body, she begins to focus on her breathing, entering a meditative state. Focusing on the building across the one they are in, she asks as a black mist begins to rise from her, "Would you like me to see or hear what's going on?" Lorm quickly responds,
"Well, seeing what is going on won't do us much good. What they are talking about is more important."
"All right," Elizabeth responds, her eyes closed, letting her mind drift to the borders of her soul and the seam that connects her to the being that channels the power through her. Her voice calls out to the vast expanse of her mind space, to the far side of the seam. "Let me hear the room around the one known as Esmeralda J." To Elizabeth's surprise, not expecting a response, the void beyond the reaches of her mind space, in a deep, monolithic voice filled with eons of knowledge and power, roars effortlessly back,
"It shall be."
Elizabeth visibly grimaces as she watches the seam in her mind space corrupt, with the black of the void creeping into the radiance of her mind. The black mist that rises from Elizabeth's body makes those watching uneasy as it extends up nearly 2 feet from her before fading into nothingness. The crystal on the holy symbol that pulses with dark energy and Elizabeth's body begin to move and speak, her voice echoing unnaturally around her. Shun ral ahar Mikalakai. Her arms extend in front of her, drawing an alien symbol that manifests as solid energy and light that ripples with intensity and regular intervals. For Elizabeth, the multicolored, clouded expanse of her mind goes dark, with her projection of herself being thrust into the material world. Unable to see, she concentrates on hearing the environment around her, recognizing two voices, Esmeralda's and her father's. The sound clarify to be understandable as Esmeralda's voice yelling at her father. I still don't understand how you can just kill both of them, you scumbag. Elizabeth instinctively relays the words she hears, prefacing the change to Cromwell's interjection by saying his name. Cromwell, the first was because of you left your poor old father without even saying goodbye, and the second was because he disrespected me by questioning the first. Esmeralda continues, Well, I'm here now, so just don't hurt any more of them, father. Cromwell responds, I wouldn't dream of it, dear. Now go get changed. I'm having a banquet to celebrate your return. Footsteps on wood stairs and a door slamming closed sounds like Esmeralda went to a room. Cromwell is continuing. Jacob, go gather the guests. Another man responds, Yes, sir. It sounds as though he is leaving. Elizabeth's eyes open as the magic that whirls around her fades. Releasing another deep breath, she asks, Does that help at all? Looking disappointed, Lorm responds, Well, it wasn't much, but I guess we can know that Captain isn't happy about being here. I wonder, though, who was that jerk talking about by saying guests? Before speculations can be made, a knock on the door cracks into the lower room. A voice calls down into the divided area of curtained cells. The ones that go by the names Aldrin, Auburn, Elizabeth, and Pearl. Captain Cromwell would like to invite you to the party commemorating his daughter's return. This is not optional. If you wish to remain in this city, you will follow me. Now. Surprised by the sudden intrusion, the group find no counter options, and fearing the results of their disobedience may have Esmeralda, Rev, and Lorm, the four of them follow begrudgingly out of the inn. The sky is dark with night, and the wood plank path that interconnects the whole of the floating city is lit by flickering street lights. The crowd with drunken lowlifes. Though crowded, the path clears in the presence of the man escorting the four outside, who leads the four deeper into the collection of the floating buildings, into a large dining hall. Through large ornate doors, which in no way match the walls next to them, the large building holds more than 100 seats, all filled with people gluttonously stuffing their faces with a feast laid upon the long U-shaped table. In the center of the table, across the room from the door, Cromwell sits with a devilish grin, with Esmeralda gowned in an elaborate woven plum-purple dress, poking at a haunch of meat with a fork and a downtrodden expression molded onto her face. With the sound of the hall's doors grabbing her attention, Esmeralda looks up, only for her expression to morph into anger as she throws herself to her feet, yelling at the grinning Cromwell. What is this? You said you wouldn't hurt them. Grabbing Esmeralda's arm and pulling her down into her seat, Cromwell growls,
Sit down. I did say that. I'm not going to. Just eat your pork and be silent. Jacob, introductions, please.
The man referred to as Jacob steps across the room to the table, gesturing to the group he escorted to step to the center of the room. The moment the four comply and step into place, Jacob speaks. Hi, Captain. I present the outsiders brought here by your daughter. One Aldrin, one Auburn, one Elizabeth, and one Pearl. Each out of place in your presence. Cromwell laughs a hearty, deep, gutted laugh, lifting his goblet toward the four strangers, saying,
"Oh, outsiders! You are lucky, for today you are brought into my knowledge on the same day of my daughter's return to me. Because of this, and because of a promise I made to me dear daughter, when you arrived, I will not kill you. But I cannot let strangers to our family be allowed to stay without being vouched for."
I vouch for them, Esmeralda yells, leaping to her feet and glaring at her father. Standing as quick as his daughter had, Cromwell's arm raises, bringing the back of his hand into Esmeralda's cheek, sending her back down into her seat. Lowering the hand, he sighs, saying,
"Now look what you made me do. I was going to be generous and ask the others if one of them would vouch for you, your friends, as a favor to you. You know, you lost your ability to vouch for newcomers the moment one of your crew stood against me on the docks. Now, because of your outburst, they must earn my permission the hard way."
The crowd sat at the table break into an uproar with Cromwell's words chanting, "Pit, pit, pit." Playing to the crowd, Cromwell raises his goblet, again splashing a small amount of wine from it, yelling,
"You're right, my friends. It is time for these outsiders to meet the pit."
Worried and confused looks form on Elizabeth, Pearl, and Aldrin's faces with Cromwell's words, before watching the pirate lord's hand gesture to the right of the room from the group's perspective, where a man leaps from the table and runs to a lever on the wall, pulling it to Cromwell's command. With a click, the lever releases a latch, when pulled, that causes the floor beneath the group's feet to fall out beneath them. 20 feet into the water below is the drop they fall, each with a splash. In an instant, they each break the water's surface, gasping for air. And quickly, Aldrin, Auburn, and Pearl swim to floating wood platforms that bob on the water's surface. But Elizabeth is left beneath the open floor of the dining hall, flailing in the water's gasping for air. Standing on the raft, like a platform, Pearl sees Elizabeth panicking and attempts to stay abreast, and calls out, "Lizzie, what are you doing? Get out of there! We don't know what could be in the water!" In between downward thrusts of uncontrollable panic with her arms, Elizabeth calls out, not being able to see where Pearl is calling from, saying, "I can't swim, remember?" "What?" Pearl calls back before she, Auburn, and Aldrin witness cages next to the water open, releasing two massive creatures, the likes they've never seen before, into the water, with the thrashing Elizabeth. Pearl, seeing the alien monsters drop into the water, glances back to Elizabeth before calling to Aldrin and Auburn with another floating platform. "Keep those things off of me. I'm gonna grab Elizabeth." Aldrin watches Pearl dive into the water, grunting to himself. What does she think she can do? I can do. The powder have on me is soaked. It is useless in this state. Turning to Auburn, he continues, You have to get those things attention.
Fine.
Auburn growls, drawing back and firing 2 arrows, one into each creature. Each arrow finds its mark in the hide of the strange twisted forms that speed through the water at unnatural rates. Shifting their direction, the 2 creatures turn from Elizabeth and toward Aldrin and Auburn. Bursting through the water's surface, the creatures finally reveal their forms. Aberrations against the nature, the 2 tower over the small floating platform before crashing down, shattering it, and sending the 2 men flying. Pearl pulls Elizabeth out of the water onto one of the remaining platforms. Aldrin and Auburn pull themselves on different platforms out of the water. The 4 turn to where the other platform was, where they see the water beginning to settle over the reef that keeps the water under the pirate cove gently calm, and see no signs of the creatures that destroyed the platform. The 4 each prepare themselves to be surprised from any angle, readying their weapons. In a flash, water erupts on flank sides beside Elizabeth and Pearl, as the 2 monsters rise from the water next to them. The creatures revealed usher a barrage of attacks that had been prepared for their reemergence. Arrows pierce their hides, Pearl's blades find purchase. The 2 creatures are undeterred from their attack down on the 2 women, striking them with bobbing wood planks, but not breaking. It's like they had one before. Above the water's surface, the 2 creatures provide a prolonged look at their visage, and the dim, flickering light permeating from above. The smaller of the 2 easily stands larger than a bear, a writhing mass of tentacles, oozing a slimy substance that radiates a strange warmth from it. The other, more than twice the size, is a singular mass of churning flesh with long, slender human-like arms reaching out from all points, and a massive toothy mouth on one side, large enough to swallow the smaller one whole, and a singular eye that seems to shift over the surface of the flesh, sporadically, in no discernible pattern. Without warning, the large mass releases its grip on Pearl and, with supernatural speed, whips across the surface of the water to an unoccupied platform, drawing its enormous mouth back, forming a wad of mucus. Pulling at the grasping tendrils, Elizabeth frees one arm, enough to focus on the energies in her soul and scribe the glyph in the air, releasing the familiar blasting beam of magic into the writhing mass of tentacles, forcing it to recoil from her. As it moves away, 2 arrows pierce through the air from Auburn's bow and find purchase behind the other writhing, wiggling mass, causing the creature to release a painful, piercing, loud wail. Seeing the monster's pain, Pearl calls to Auburn, "What did you hit?" A cloaked 'tis in through a wiggling surface. Auburn is able to respond before having his attention pulled to a low sound of spitting from the larger creature as it releases the thick alien mucus concoction it gathered in its mouth through the air with a powerful projection of splat. The mucus flies through the air, impacting with the bobbing wood platform Auburn is standing on, forming a mound to his knees that suddenly becomes hard on impact, locking Auburn in place. The wood dips under the water's surface for a split moment with the force of the mucus mass, lapping water onto its surface and revealing another aspect of the slime, which becomes searing hot, to the point of instantly boiling the water that touches it. Aldrin sees an opportunity as the smaller of the two monstrosities recoil around him. Clenching his fist, and the whirl of electricity charging into his gauntlet fills the air, but is quieted under Auburn's grunt and the creature's own wails of pain. The instant the creature bumps the platform he is on, Aldrin maintains his balance and thrusts the fists into the spongy surface of one of the many tentacles, releasing the stored charge in a burst of electric sparks that dance across the monster's surface, sending it forward and Aldrin's platform back in the blast. With a running jump, Pearl bounds for the twisted creature as it shifts in the water toward her and Elizabeth again, and landing on it, her blade slides through the parting tentacles between the two arrows that still protrude from within it. In that instance, the instant monster falls back into the water, where it begins to bob motionless. The other creature dips into the water, vanishing from sight. Pearl jumps back to the platform Elizabeth is on, and they both prepare themselves to be surprised again by the large mass. Aldrin pushes himself to his feet, and his gaze traces to join the gazes of the other two watching. Auburn pulling against the mucus that glues his legs in place. The sludge continues to radiate intense heat that, with Auburn's groan, proves to be radiating directly into his legs. Through the grunts, Auburn looks to Aldrin, calling out, "All right, Aldrin! I know you'll die hard for to anglo me." Before Aldrin can respond, the monstrous flesh ooze bursts from the surface of the water next to him, releasing a terrifying yell that drops him to his knees, throwing his hands toward the flesh mound. Throwing her hands towards the flesh mound, Elizabeth blasts its grasping hide with two rays of the dark force. In the same moment, Auburn lets two more arrows free from his bow that whip through the air, piercing into the creature the same moment its eyes shift to the point of impact, causing the arrows to sink into the oversized retina. The eye's movement becomes far more sporadic, darting around the surface flesh of the creature in an attempt to help. Pearl draws a short blade from her side, throwing it at the creature, miraculously finding purchase in the arrows in its eye. Recoiling, the fleshy mass leaps from the water in a burst, barely visible to those watching, and into the cage it had fallen from, closing it behind itself. After a moment, the arrows and dagger drop from the cage into the water below. A hearty laugh echoes from the dining hall above. Cromwell speaks through the hole into the water.
"Good show. You have put up a good fight. I vouch for you to be allowed to stay in our city."
Turning to the others in the room above, the large man gestures with his goblet, commanding,
"Get them the ladder."
A moment later, at Cromwell's words, a rope ladder lowers to the water's surface. Pearl helps Elizabeth to the ladder, and breaking Auburn free, the four are helped back up into the dining hall, where they are greeted with the cheers of the party of captains that feasted over their combat. Bolstered by the apparent adulation, Pearl raises her hands, calling out to the cheers, "Thank you, thank you. So can we eat now?" Stepping to the group of four, Jacob gestures to the door, responding softly to jest them, "No. Please return to the arrangements you made for yourselves." With another hearty laugh, Cromwell slaps Jacob's, chuckling,
"I'm afraid our stick in the mud is correct. This is a private gathering now. With my blessing, you are allowed to stay in our cove, but not here. Jacob, pack them doggy bags before they go. We need to treat them for being the first to ever earn me blessing through the pit.
A nod precedes Jacob's exit, who scrambles from the room into a back area, only to return with a single linen pouch that he hands Pearl. With a shove, Pearl and the others are removed from the building and return to the inn, where they meet again with Lorm and Rev. The two members of Esmeralda's crew are completely flabbergasted when the doors open to the sleeping area below the tavern, revealing the four. Lorm yells at them as they enter, unable to contain his surprise.
You're all right? We both thought you were goners for sure. Well, better pack your things. Esme still has some connections in this town, and she sent us a message that we're leaving before dawn.